We had a little while ago, we had a request from someone in the audience who said, could we do a talk live on the basics and general matters relating to the hobby, growing cacti and succulents. So Dave has volunteered to do this, which is tremendous. So we're really looking forward to this. We did a test a few weeks ago. We got the technology working. It was a little bit of a brighter day at that point, but I'm sure this will be wonderful. So we're going to recall this. We'll see how we go. We might possibly put it on YouTube, but we'll see how we go. But obviously, if you've got questions you want to ask, go through. You can put those in the chat as we go through, and if we spot those, I think the ones we can ask. But there'll be opportunity at the end as well, I think, as well. So over to Dave. Thank you, Dave.
I thought first of all, I'd just sort of say a little bit about how I started, which was 40 plus years ago. Friend of mine, Mike, who's probably out there watching tonight somewhere, had some plants on his windowsill, and I thought, oh, these are interesting things. And so I started getting a few myself, and that was the start of me getting hooked on these plants. Initially, I was growing on a windowsill. Unfortunately, it was a north-facing one in my bedroom, so it wasn't the best situation. And I don't think there's an awful lot of plants I had from that time that are still around with me now. What I'm just going to do is just show you a few of my earlier collection pictures. So I'm just going to share the screen briefly. Oops. Let's get that one there. And play should work, hopefully. There we go. Has that come up okay?
Indeed it has.
Yep. Okay. I suppose I better explain the title first. I grew them, well, I tried to get them to grow my way, but a long time ago I realised that really, if they're not happy, you're going to have to grow them their way. And that's really what the title was all about there. So this is a scanned photo, so it's not all that good. But there are one or two plants in here, in amongst Dad's grapevine, that I still have. There's this agave here, is unfortunately currently outside in the rain, because it would be roughly where I'm sitting now. I don't think that would have been a very comfortable position for me to be in. So yeah, I used to, once I'd outgrown my windowsill and I was allowed a bit of space in my father's greenhouse, this is how it was. I say sharing it with grapes and tomatoes and cucumbers and things. It's not perfect conditions, but you know, it was better than a north-facing windowsill by a long way. Again, there's a few plants from back here that are still around. This trichodiadema here is still in the same pot, actually, although it has had fresh soil. So some plants don't outgrow you, and some might do. I eventually sort of got my first place, and it was a maisonette with a little garden. And of course, I had to get a greenhouse. And obviously, some plants I already had that were happy outside. That was one that was in the earlier picture as well. Let's just quickly go through these. It wasn't a big garden, so I couldn't have a very big greenhouse, but hey, it was a start, and that's it is. And at the start, as my collection was building up again, I did allow a few tomatoes in the first year, but it soon ran out. This is the current setup. So this is the greenhouse here that I'm sitting and talking from at the moment. The second greenhouse down here is one that I acquired from a work colleague of my wife's, who was getting rid of it at the time. I was looking for a second greenhouse, so so that worked out quite well. Managed to take it down and get it here without breaking any of the glass. Haven't been so good since. So notice it's getting louder with the rain. I hope you can still hear it okay. Well, me rather than the rain. And then in between the two here, what I've got is well, it's supposed to be a temporary shelter that I put up in winter. There's a few agaves and things bedded out behind here, just to keep the rain off them and keep them a bit drier. That's there. I just didn't get around to taking it all down this year, so it's still there. The door's off, the roof's off, although I've got a sheet over the top at the moment to keep some of the rain out. So that's what's there. Probably the sort of best bit of advice I was given by a family friend when I was looking to get the greenhouse for the garden here was go for the biggest one that you can, because you'll always fill it. And that's certainly true. So started off with this one here, and that got filled. Let's say got a second one over here, and then when that started to sort of overgrow, then I've got this shelter for some of the more hardy ones in the winter. I think this must have been taken towards the end of the sort of spring. The heater's still there for the cold nights. And, so with a greenhouse, as I said, basically try and get the biggest one that you can. I don't normally have space to sit in my greenhouse. This is quite unusual. A lot of things are outside that would be on the floor in here, taking up space. And they'll have to move back tomorrow. So you've got your greenhouse. What else do we need inside it? Well, obviously in the summer, particularly this year, ventilation is quite an important thing. This greenhouse has got two windows that open. I can probably just about show you there. So just a bit further. So we've got one on this side, one on the other side, and just that I don't end up getting a free shower. But they've been open most of the summer. Even the last few nights, they've been open a crack just to get a bit of airflow as the weather goes on. You can probably also see over on this side, I've still got some of the bubble wrap up on the side of the greenhouse here. Usually I put that up in the winter just to try and insulate it a bit more and reduce heating costs as much as possible. So the rest of the greenhouse will get done probably around about beginning to middle of October is when I do that. Obviously the far end of the greenhouse, which I can't get to otherwise, will be done first before the plants start coming in, and then the front end gets done last. So there's various ways of keeping it on there. So I've got boxes and bits and pieces everywhere to grab things out of, and I just can't quite find the right bit. So we've got these little that hold the bubble wrap short distance from the glass, so you've got a layer of air in there that's trapped, and that acts as an insulator, and with the air trapped in the bubble wrap as well, that gives you quite good heat in there. I'll just see a question. Where do I live? I'm in Surrey, so just south of London. I've got quite a nice open garden here. Gets sun most of the day. Rises up over the houses over that way and sits over that side somewhere later. This greenhouse has got a hedge to the left-hand side of where I'm sitting at the moment. So that also, I think, gives a bit of shelter in the winter from some of the winds and things, which helps. Doesn't block out too much of the light either because of the side of the greenhouse that it's on. So that works quite well. In the other greenhouse, it's got automatic vents on the windows, so I don't have to worry about doing that manually. I just couldn't find any that actually fitted the windows in here. They're a slightly different style to what most of the automatic vents seem to fit. But automatic vents are excellent if you're not able to sort of regularly pop out and open and close, particularly at those times of year where the temperatures are fluctuating all over the place. it can just do its own thing, and then at least I know if it's getting too hot, there will be some air getting in and out. The other thing I've started using in here, because I had some spare sheets for it, is the polycarbonate twin wall that I used for the outdoor shelter that I showed you earlier on the slide. And there's a few bits of that around. I'll just move that over here. There's a bit, oops, you can see up against the wall there. That's been in there all summer long because, yeah, I just didn't get around to taking a lot of it down this year. So that's an alternative to the bubble wrap. It tends to stay out of the way a bit more easily, but I don't know how many years it will last. The outside stuff on the shelter is about 4 years old, and the weather is starting to take its toll on it a little bit now. I noticed that particularly the roof bit has started to crack. So it's almost like a single sheet in places now rather than twin walled. So the insulation wouldn't be quite as good on that as it has been. So what I'll probably do for this winter is put a sheet of plastic underneath and then put the roof on top just to sort of waterproof it and give it that extra layer. So that's about greenhouses. What else have I written down here? I made a few notes just to remind myself what I was going to talk about. Obviously, in the summer, doors can be left wide open or closed over if necessary, depending on what's going on. I've got mine closed at the moment, so I don't get washed away in the rain, although it seems to have eased up for a moment, fortunately. Heating is another thing. Obviously, in the winter, I've got, at the moment, electric heaters in both greenhouses. I don't rely on the thermostats in the heaters themselves. I found they can tend to stick or not come on or just not adjust quickly enough to temperature changes. So for both of them, I've now got an external thermostat that is much more accurate at picking up temperature changes. So I just leave the heater on max and then it will just switch on and off with the thermostat, which seems to help at keeping it at a steady temperature much better than relying on the inbuilt ones. So those I need to get out and test fairly soon just to make sure that they're all still working, because they've been down the shed since probably about sort of May time. So yeah, it's that time to start getting ready for the winter in the greenhouse, really. Other things in the summer, apart from vents and windows, as I said, this year I didn't take all the bubble wrap off, particularly in the other greenhouse. I just never got around to it, and it was just too difficult to get to the far end to unhook it and everything, so I just decided to leave it. What that meant was that I didn't have to this year worry about sort of putting any of the greenhouse shading stuff on the glass, which I've been using the previous few years. This is just one example. There are the various makes around. A few years ago, when we had a very hot summer, it was quite difficult to get hold of because I think everybody wanted it. And it might have been the same this year, but I've got quite a bit. And as I say, I didn't need it in the end this year anyway. But that is quite useful in the summer. Just sort of, I don't cover the whole greenhouse. I tend to cover the sort of roof on the side that gets the most sun, just to cut down some of the extreme sunlight that gets onto the plants. And that seems to save most things from getting scorched. I'll come back to scorch a little bit later, though. The other thing I do sometimes, because what I haven't got and I need to get around at some point, is just some fans that can move the air in the summer when it's hot. Normally, I just leave, I've got double doors on this one, so if I open those and the two windows, that's usually enough ventilation for most of the time. The other greenhouse, the windows come out, or the glass panels come out quite easily, and there's probably still about 3 or 4 out at the moment from there, just to give a bit of airflow. I've got a couple of polycarbonate sheets if I want to cover it over, particularly at the moment, as I say, with the rain sweeping around. one of the panels down there has got polycarbonate over the top instead of the glass, just to sort of stop the rain getting in through the window and onto things that I don't want it to get onto. So that's ventilation in the other greenhouse as well. The other thing I do sometimes, if it's very hot and in the summer, there usually is a little bit of floor space in both of the greenhouses. I tend to sort of put some water onto the floor of the greenhouse. Floor will heat it up, absorb some of the heat, and obviously hot air rising, hopefully out of the vents, out of the windows. And that helps sometimes if you've got those extreme hot days and you happen to be around, just to sort of keep the temperature down by a few degrees. Otherwise, other things to do in the greenhouse, obviously, when you can, I find springtime, usually there's a bit of a build-up of algae on some of the glass panels. Not always easy to get to all of them. There are some in here that haven't been cleaned for some considerable time. And really it would need me to get everything out and to be able to get some of the bits in here. Although, having said that, this year I showed some plants for the first time in about 35 years for the local branch show in Croydon. And because they've gone out, that gave me a chance to sort of then rearrange, do some repotting. And there's still no space, but it looks a bit neater. One of the things I find is that I tend to sort of use every bit of space that's available. So let's see, I'm not going to be able to see this very easily, but I move along with the light and just turn over this way. So over here I've got a bit of shelving, which has got sort of 3 layers. The bottom one is where I tend to keep things like conophytums in the summer, so they're in the shade, cool a bit of the greenhouse, and they're now moved out. Most of them anyway, there's a few still down there that will get a sunnier position once I've moved all this stuff out of the greenhouse again. The other thing I've moved on to doing recently is to start using a few hanging baskets. Just so we've got a couple of Mammillarias in this greenhouse that were sort of decided they wanted to go horizontal rather than vertical. There's one on this side, and I just want to put the light directly onto the screen because I don't want to blind everyone. And then I've got Mammillaria matudae up here, which obviously enjoyed its repot because there's about half a dozen new pups coming off the side of the top that you can't see at the moment. But not content with having that in there, there was some space on the top, so there's also there a couple of other little plants that I've just rested up there because there wasn't any space on the bench at the time when I got them. So they'll stay there for the time being. And quite often I have got things stacked up on top of each other. Behind me, let's move this from me. I've got my large Aloe africana, which is a little bit confused this year. Normally it flowers regularly between sort of end of Feb, beginning of April, but it's got inflorescence coming up on the top now. Not sure whether that means it thought it was on its way out in the hot weather, or whether it thought that was its dry spell and it's now back into its grain season. But yeah, that's about 6 months out from where it normally is. But if we look lower down, let's see if I can see that on the screen there. Yeah. So on the top of the pot, there's plenty of space to stack up other aloes and plants and things. And just trying to make the best use of the space as possible. Unfortunately, under the bench that side is a very dark area, so it doesn't really get much light for anything to grow very nicely down there. There's a Gasteria that quite likes it up this end where there's a little bit more light, but the far corner tends to be where I just put anything cutting wise that if it survives, it survives. If it dies, then it's no great loss. Unfortunately, that's a bit of a dead space, unfortunately. Otherwise, it would be filled with plants like the rest of it. So that's a bit about the greenhouses and what I do in the greenhouse. So the other things that I think was asked about is sort of care and attention and that sort of thing for plants in the greenhouse. So just going to go through a few of those sort of things. Ideally, with the new plants, it's a good idea to isolate them, keep them somewhere separate, so that if there is any problem with any bugs or anything, then they don't spread around the rest of the greenhouse and your collection. I have to say I seem to have different pests in different years. Last year, I had a fair bit of red spider. I haven't noticed any this year, whereas mealybugs seem to have had a bit of a fight back after a couple of years where I'd just about got rid of them. And I'm finding a few places where they're hiding and managing to keep themselves going. So those are the sort of two main pests that I have trouble with. Occasional problems at the moment. I've got some slugs or snails chewing some of my mesems that are just coming out of hibernation. So nice, fresh, juicy leaves. So that was time for the new, not quite so effective, but still seems to do a reasonable job, slug pellets. So I've sprinkled a few of those around in the other greenhouse. Other things that I use for pest control, there are these yellow sticky traps that tend to catch flying insects and things. Quite useful. You can see what is around. I'm quite pleased. It doesn't seem to attract the bees and the hoverflies, which tend to come in and they're buzzing around the flowers and things. I haven't found too many of them trapped on there. A couple of moths on this one that's in this greenhouse, lots of house flies. Usually indicates that the stapeliads are flowering. There's one at the back there in the dark. There's no chance of seeing, but it's got a few open at the moment, which is why I think we've caught a few of them recently. Quite a few fungus gnats and those sort of things on there. So it just lets you know what's in here and flying around. The one thing I would say with these though, make sure it's well tied up. I had a bit of an accident recently with one of these. I was just swapping it over. I'd got the dead one out, or not the dead one, the one with the dead insects on because it was fairly full. And I hadn't twisted it far enough. So I just turned away to put the other one down and shrunk down it came. Now, it was cacti underneath. So most of them, of course, would have spines to protect them and would probably not suffer too much damage. But unfortunately, it managed to fall on a Lophophora. And I got a nice slice through the body there. I can't quite see if you can see that there. But it's sliced through there. It looks like it's dried up quite nicely now. I was thinking of repotting this one this year, but I thought, no, rather than disturbing it too much, I'm going to let that dry and it can wait till next year. I've been more careful than I normally would be with watering this one as well, just to make sure that I didn't leave any water in there where the crack is. So I've just watered it in the gaps either side very gingerly, just until I was satisfied that it had sort of healed itself over. But I mean, that's typical, isn't it? I mean, you've got all these plants that, you know, it would have bounced off of, maybe damaged the odd spine, but it managed to find the one without any protection of its own. But there you go. That's life, isn't it? Let's put that one over there because I don't trust myself to reach back in the dark there and put it in the right place. So where were we? So we were talking about pests and things. So that's the traps. If you do have to share a greenhouse with tomatoes, then obviously that will also help with whitefly, which tend to like those sort of things. Other treatments that I tend to use is bug killer, vine weevil killer, it's called. I tend to use that twice a year, which I think is the maximum you're supposed to anyway. But it does take quite a few bottles of this to cover both greenhouses. So I'm not sure if you had a very big collection, whether that would be a very efficient way of doing it. But sometimes what I do is at the end of the growing season, if you ever look in some of the shops that sell it, sometimes they try and sell off their stock when they think it's not going to be used. So sometimes you can pick it up at a slight bargain at the end of the season and then keep it till next year, because usually it's got a good few years sell by date. So that's a soak that I use. So mix it in with water. Obviously, when I'm using it, I would have gloves on, have the greenhouses fully ventilated, usually start at the back end of the greenhouse so that you're moving away towards the fresh air at the front, and give them all a good soak. And it works in two ways. That one, it has both contact effect, but also more importantly, a long-term systemic effect where it gets into the plant and the plant absorbs the chemicals. And then if the insects bite it, then hopefully they come a cropper. So that's those. There's also a squirty version, which if I just spot a plant that I haven't noticed in a while and it's got a fair few insects and things on it, I'll give it a quick squirt with one of those. Again, this one is supposed to work for mealybug, red spider. Does do caterpillars. I've had a few caterpillars in the past. Had one on a mesem flower bud a few years ago. I was looking at it thinking, that looks a bit oddly shaped. And then it opened and this little green devil was inside. I didn't use this on it. I just got some tweezers and it's not going to chew anything else after that. So that's another one. If you've just got one or two to give a treatment. Obviously, there are lots of different ones out there. The other stuff you can use that I find quite useful, just find one other thing I need to write out here, is methylated spirits. The problem with mealybugs is their waxy coat. A lot of the water stuff, if you spray it on, it just runs off them and they sort of sit there laughing at you. Meths, it gets through that coating. And again, if you've got a small infestation, nice paintbrush, dip it in the meths, dip it on the plant, and that usually takes care of small outbreaks. I also find sometimes if you spot, when you repot, sometimes they've made little homes around the holes in the bottom of the pot. So when you take it out, sometimes there'll be a few around there. And again, particularly if I don't want to disturb the root ball, if it's one that maybe is a tuberous root or something, and I just don't want to damage it, what I might do is, again, dip a bit of meths on there, dip it onto the insects, let it dry off for a bit, and then get on with the repotting after that. So that's another one. Let's pop that down there. In my box of goodies down here, the other stuff that I use to try and keep pests under control is the SB plant invigorator, which, as it says, it's not a chemical control, it's a sort of physical control. So again, like the meths, it interferes with the coating on the insects and deals with them that way. This you can sort of put into a big spray. I've got a 7-litre spray that I use, and it still takes maybe 3 or 4 fill-ups per greenhouse to give everything a spray with that. I probably don't use this quite as often as I should do. To keep good control, I think it needs to be sort of fairly regularly, at least sort of, yeah, best results spray weekly, it says on there. Yeah, it just depends when you've got time and things, but it does seem quite effective. It does seem to help with thrips and things a bit as well. So yeah, that's quite a useful one for that. As I say, it is plant invigorator, so it's not only there to kill off the bugs, but it also has some sort of feeding to help the plants a bit as well, which is always good. So that's sort of in between the two. The other things I've got down here are mainly on the feeding side of things. So those are the sort of things I would use for pest control. Oh, just remembered one pest visitor that I had last year for the first time. And it was some mice. And I think they got in because I had a louver vent on the low part of the greenhouse. And it was only plastic, so the plastic didn't close up very well. So I have a feeling they crawled in through the gaps in that. And unfortunately, in the middle of winter, don't necessarily go down and check it every day. But what I found was a lot of plants had been nibbled. And first of all, oh, slugs. But then there were bits of leaves of those plants scattered around. So it clearly wasn't a slug or a snail that had caused it. And then on one or two, you could clearly see little tooth bites around the little baby plants. It got an epiphyllantha, which is still alive, but it's clearly had a good bite on it because it's misshapen it. It also had all the fruit off of my Lophophora in the other greenhouse. So I don't know whether it was happy or not after that. And also some of the winter-grey mesonyms, which were just coming into flower, 1 or 2 for the first time. I hadn't seen those flowers, and I still haven't, but hopefully this winter I will have a mouse-free attempt, and we'll get rid of those. I did end up having to put mouse traps and things in there, and 2 were removed, and that was the end of the damage. But they even got inside. I've got a large propagator in the other one, which I tend to leave the vents open just so that it doesn't get too damp in there, because some of the winter growers do get a bit of water. And they've gone in through the vent and had a chew around in there as well. So yeah, they were determined to sort of try as many different varieties as possible, I think, in the greenhouse. But I hope not to have another visitation from them this year. So that's the pests and things. In terms of feeding, what I tend to do during the growing season is to sort of use, well, it depends how long I've got. I find I've got 2 main ones that I use. Obviously, the SB plant invigorator just goes when I spray things. I've got Chempact number 8, which I use sometimes, but it does seem to take a while to dissolve. So what I tend to do with that is do that when I've got enough time to mix it up in advance, let it sit for a while, and make sure it's fully dissolved. Otherwise, what I find is that you start watering it, and then at the bottom, you find there's a lot of stuff that's either not dissolved very well or isn't. So then some plants are getting a good feed, some are getting a poor feed, some are getting overfed, which is something I might come back to later if I can see where the example is I've got down there. So that one I tend to use when I've got a bit more time. I know some people use certain varieties of fertilizers at different points of the year. With me, it's more a question of sort of, do I want to get the job done quickly, or have I got a bit more time to do it? The other thing I tend to use is tomato fertilizer. Now that dissolves nice and easily. You just lob it in the watering can, top it up to the right concentration. Usually I use about third to half strength in most waterings that I do over the summer. The only time I wouldn't is if I'm doing a soak with a pesticide to do that. But yeah, this dissolves nice and easily, and yeah, seems to work pretty well in most cases. So that's feeding. I know we wanted a bit on repotting, which I'm going to do in a moment. There's a couple of other things I thought I would just mention. So one of the things I do when I get new plants, I got into the habit, well, since I got really back into cacti again about sort of 7 or 8 years ago now. Some of the plants that I'd had for quite a while and hadn't been looking at all that often, I suddenly realized that their labels were completely blank. And although at times I've got records of what I bought and what the names and things are, I realized that there were quite a few where I really hadn't got a clue what they were anymore. So what I do now is when I get a new plant, I always take a picture of the plant with the label showing so that I've got a record of its name, just in case. Some of the labels last for years, decades even. I've got some original ones here from the 80s. But there are other labels that, you know, they're out for one summer. You touch them and they just crumple away to nothing. So at least if you've got a record somewhere of what it is, you can replace it when you need to. What I'm doing at the moment in terms of labeling, I got fed up writing because my handwriting isn't the neatest as well. So I decided to go down the printing route. So what I got are these label sheets. So this is polypropylene matte surface. First ones I got were the shiny surface, and what I found with those is the ink doesn't stick quite so well. So you'd put your finger on it and then suddenly you'd have no name again. This seems to work quite well so far. Obviously, it's only a couple of years I've been using these now, so it'll be interesting to see if this one works fine over the longer term. But again, labels, I've just got these big white ones here. I bought a bulk pack of 1,000 online from some app or on Amazon. Initially, they sent me bright yellow ones, despite the fact the order clearly said white. But yeah, they changed it, no trouble. And I've now got plentiful supply to keep me going for a fair while. The other thing I keep handy around the greenhouse is a bit of black card. Sometimes you'll notice something in flower and you just want that plant on its own. So I've got one obligingly behind me here, so let's just move it. I won't do the picture itself, but so we've got an Echinopsis flower over there. Can we see it on the screen? Yep, I can just about get my belly out of the way. So if I wanted to, I could position that there, get a nice picture, and that it's just a useful thing to have around. The only thing I find is that usually I have it somewhere near the door, and this morning this got a bit damp because obviously there was a fair bit of condensation last night. So it's probably getting towards the time of year where it has to go inside and then just comes out with me when I come out to the greenhouse. But it's always useful to have a sort of background to just focus on the plant that you're interested in. Other things that I find useful in the greenhouse. I have this little dustpan and brush. It's nice and small. It doesn't take up too much room. It slides by the door in the other greenhouse quite nicely. Very useful. Took it with me last year when I was at Lullingstone and spilt a few plants, and it was well worth bringing along. Just clears things up nice and easily without taking up too much space. So that's one. Some sort of grabbers. Again, very useful if you're trying to get to a pot and it's not very easy. These, let's just turn around that way a bit. So I can't really see what I'm doing here, but we'll just grab one there. So grab some of it. Oh, no, maybe not that one. This one will be easier. So you can grab it out, and there we go. Take it out, and then do a picture, check it for bugs, whatever it is you needed to inspect it for. So something like that is quite a useful little tool to have around the greenhouse. Tweezers, again, quite useful. If you've got a little odd mealybuggy spot somewhere in between the spines of something, you can get a nice little squish with a pair of tweezers, which is always very satisfying. So dealing with seedlings and things, there's a dibber to sort of make holes in the compost, and spatula here is quite useful. Particularly I find what I normally do with seedlings is start them off in a little 2-inch pot like these ones here. Then they'll go from that into a seed tray for a while, and quite often once they're in the seed tray, some things will grow really fast and some things won't. And if you've got a mixture of things, it's quite useful to have something like this that can get into the soil and get them out one at a time as you need them. So those are another couple of useful bits of kit to have around. So repotting is the other thing that was asked to have a look at. So let's see how we go there. So I've got a tray here with a few bits and pieces in it. The compost that I use, obviously there's a video about it on the YouTube channel, but my usual mix is about 2 parts John Innes number 3, 2 parts sharp sand, and 1 part grit. It might vary a little bit. If I've got something that's particularly sensitive to damp conditions, I may well add a bit more grit to it. If I've got something that's going in a hanging basket like this one will be, I will probably add some lightweight material to it, like perlite, which I've got in this one here. The other thing that you can use, if you've got a pot and you don't want it to be too heavy, is, where's it gone? Oh, there it is old bits of polystyrene. Round here, these don't get recycled. They just go into the bins. They'll either be burnt, giving off greenhouse gases, or put into landfill. So I tend to reuse it. Sometimes big sheets, another thing I do with them sometimes is put them on the floor of the greenhouse for the winter, so that if any plants are on the floor, they're not directly in contact with the floor, so the roots are kept that little bit warmer. That was something I didn't mention earlier, but smaller or misshapen bits like this are quite useful. Put them in the bottom of the pot. If you've got a heavy plant and you want to make the container a bit lighter, then broken up bits of polystyrene is quite a useful way to go. The ones I wouldn't use that in are sort of some of the taller columnar cacti, which may tend to topple a bit more easily, and you want the weight at the bottom of the pot. So you might go the opposite way with them. You might put some old clay pot or something in there to give it a bit of extra weight. but that's something that can be used, and I've been using that for many years. So let's have a little look at these. Now, this aloe is one that I got up at the National recently, and it has got a very good root system, which has made its way well out of the bottom of the pot. So it clearly is time for it to have some fresh soil and a bigger pot. Now, let's turn this around this way. So first thing I'll do with this is, and I haven't tried this before, so I don't know whether this is going to come out easily or not. Oh, no, it should be all right. Now, with this one, the root is small enough that it will pull through the hole in the bottom. We might lose a few of these little side roots on there, but the main root itself should be okay. It might have to be a bit careful when I get to this kink here, but we'll see how it goes. So let's just gently get that on there. Yep, got it. Then I'm just going to put the plant down for a second. Yeah, that's that one. And the next bin, there we go. So at this stage, what I normally do is just have a little check inside the pot. Is there any sign of anything we don't want in there? No little white patches. Sometimes with root mealy, you'll see little patches of white around the edges of the pot when you're repotting. So yeah, that's something to have a little look out for, but this one looks nice and healthy. Of course, if you have been using polystyrene or perlite, don't get confused with that, because that's white and powdery as well at times. So somewhere I put a couple of pots aside for this. Unfortunately, the light isn't reaching lower down here. Where's it gone? Yeah, I think that was the one. Yeah, so what I tend to do when repotting is to try and disturb the roots as little as possible if I think the soil that it's in is okay. Some of the ones that you get from supermarkets and garden centres, the soil can be a bit suspect at times. So you may, in most cases, want to sort of gently break it away or wash it away. If it was earlier in the summer and I wanted to get the soil off this, I may well leave it soaking in water, wiggle it around a bit till most of the soil falls off of it. But no, this one is nice and healthy, good root system on the bottom there. So that is going to go straight in. So other than getting the roots out, this one was fairly straightforward. So I'm just going to hold it in position and carefully just add soil all the way around the outside. Sometimes if I've got one that is not so easy to handle, what I might do, if I was keeping the compost on the plant, is to put the old pot inside and fill up around it. So then all you've got to do is to drop it in, and I might do an example of that in a moment. Yeah, so I'll just pop that in there. I don't often try doing repotting in the half dark, so I'm struggling to see where some of the compost is, which is one of the reasons for having this tray underneath at the moment. At least it will catch anything that goes over the edges. So there we go, and tap that there. I might need to just come back and have a look at it in the morning just to make sure, but I think that's okay. Yeah, one of the other things with plants and things is top dress or not top dress. By that I mean, do you put any sort of shingle or anything around the top to sort of to go on the top? I mean, it can make them look nicer, and I used to do it on all my plants, but I've found that I now prefer not to top dress them. Mainly because it's a lot easier to see when the compost is dry. If you've got shingle or something on the top there, the shingle might look dry, but underneath it could still be fairly damp since the last watering. Now, where did I put the label? Oh, there it is. I thought for a minute I'd buried it under there. Oops. Just one. Come in there. So there we go. So that's one plant that hopefully now is going to be happy in that pot for at least a year, hopefully 2. And that's that one done. So there we go. So that's what I do is don't fill the soil right up to the top of the pot. Leave yourself a little bit of room. That way, when you water, it's not just going to run off the top, and it can sit there and soak in if it needs to. Yeah, again, that's something I could mention. I tend to water from above. Some people water from underneath, but a lot of my benches in here haven't got any sort of trays or anything. So if I watered that way, it wouldn't work for me. So I water from above. Usually I use, this watering can here. I mix up, if I'm using fertilizer, in a bigger water can outside, just fill this up and bring it in. I tend to sort of cover the end and then just aim it and let it go. I'm not going to do it now because it'll probably end up going all over the place and I don't want it on the laptop. Yeah, that's what I use for watering. This won't be watered just yet, just in case any of the roots suffered a little bit of damage there. And also with the time of year as well, it'll probably get at least 1 water before I stop for the winter. And we'll see how that goes. I'm running out of floor space down here. Stick that on there. So that was a fairly straightforward one. Now, where did I put the others? Yeah, this is the trouble with the light disappearing. Yeah, there's a couple of cacti around here somewhere. Ah, there they are. I found them. So let me just bring these two up here. I'm not going to do both of these, but there's a couple of things I was just going to mention. So I've got Gymnocalycium bruchii here. Desperately needs a repot. As the little pups all the way around and right to the edge. Now, normally I might just go up 1 pot size, but because this has got so many pups around it, I'd be tempted to give it a bit of extra room when I repot that one, just because that's going to grow that way, that's going to grow that way. So effectively, it's going to fill the space twice as quickly. So that's what we got there. So we've got a message there. How soon after repotting do I water the plants? It depends. It's the honest answer. If I think it's a tuberous rooted thing and there's a possibility it's been damaged, particularly if it's in a fairly gritty soil and something might have sort of struck against the root, I would probably leave it at least a week or so. Sometimes though, with these small seedlings and things, and given the temperatures we had this summer, if you leave them for a week, they'll be gone. I had one little mesem seedling here that I'd transferred to the greenhouse and then went away for a couple of days, and it didn't like it. So some things are going to need it more often than others. Most cacti are quite happy to wait a week or so for water after a repot. Just some of the less succulent succulents you want to be a bit more careful with, and little tiny seedlings. Cactus seedlings I might leave a day or two. Some of the succulents I'll water almost straight away. Again, it depends a little bit on the time of year. height of summer, I wouldn't be too worried about watering it straight away in most cases. But now we're getting into the damper, cooler temperatures. It probably is best to give it a bit of a break in between. So I'm not going to repot that one now. That'll be a job for later in the week sometime. I'm just going to push on the bottom of that one, try and get that out of there. What I sometimes do, if I've got a plant and I don't want to be handling it directly too much, is find a empty pot that's going to fit over there nicely, just to hold it whilst you get it out of the one that's in. So I'm just giving that a little squeeze from both sides, a little wiggle. I can feel it starting to come out there. If it doesn't want to, then that's where something like the dibber and the spatula can come in a bit more useful. And just needed a little bit of coaxing there to get it out of its old pot. Yeah, hook spines will quite often hook into anything. So there was a little bit of perlite or something stuck on the end of that one. I did have a pot of Mammillaria seedlings, some hook spine ones, a few years ago, growing happily on indoors windowsill in the winter. And I went to water them first thing in the morning, and there was nothing in the pot. As I lifted my arm up on my dressing gown, there were 3 or 4 little seedlings attached by their hook spines. So even the very small hook spine seedlings can find their way to attach themselves to things that you don't want them to. Other things I would treat very carefully, obviously any puntia type thing with their horrible blockids. Some other ones that need a bit of careful attention, they are, I'll show you in a moment. I had a Dromaeus down there that I had successfully repotted. Lots of leaves that detach very easily. But unfortunately, when it came to sort of trying to put it into the position I wanted it in the greenhouse, I lost balance a little bit, and my juggling skills weren't good enough. So let me just finish this one off first. We'll just drop that one in there, give it a little tap to get the soil around it. It's a little bit lopsided. So again, this is where something like this can come in useful. Just going to raise it up a little bit that side, push it down a little bit that side, push the compost down that side, and yeah, that's a bit straighter. So there we go. That's happily potted on as well. I'll leave that over there. I'll tidy it up in the daylight tomorrow, so I can just sort of get the soil nice and level. The lighting's really not good enough for that at the moment. I was talking about the one that I was juggling. Fortunately, that's right behind me here. Now, this plant was completely covered in leaves only a couple of months ago. As I say, I got it into the pot. The pot was lovely, but it toppled, lost most of its leaves, and I thought, oh, well, that's that. I've got a tray down there with lots of the leaves in it, so hopefully we'll get lots of plants from that. And well, it seems to be perking up because it's now got a load of new leaves coming. It's even had a flower out today, I noticed. And so I didn't manage to kill it, fortunately. So that one is survived. But a lot of these sort of ones that have very delicate or fragilely attached leaves, some of the crassulas, etc., can be interesting. And obviously, you've also got the ones with the white Farino's coating and stuff on them, where you just don't want to touch them at all if you can help it, otherwise you'll leave a mark. So I have to watch out for that. I can see another question there. How often do I water generally through the summer? I tend to water about once a week in the summer. Sometimes can be a little bit more frequent, particularly for smaller pots, because they tend to dry out much more quickly. So things in sort of this sort of size pot would probably be watered maybe a couple of times a week. Seedlings that you don't want drying out, particularly in their first year, can be even almost daily. I've got a few mesem seedlings that will let me know immediately they want a drop of water because the leaves all sort of crumple down and things. You give it a splash and next morning they're all happy again. So some plants will give you an indication that they need a drop of water. That I think covers most of the things I was going to talk about. I was going to talk a bit about putting a hanging basket together, but in the lighting that I've got now, I don't think that's probably going to be a very wise thing to try and do. It could end up dropping down on the floor. So I think that's just about everything I had on my list to talk about. But if anyone's got any questions or anything, I'll be happy to answer them.
That was great, Dave. I think Kurt's went through all the things that we were asked to cover, and I think everybody's got their own way of doing things, and I think your way of doing things sounds very good.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, that's one thing I didn't mention. You need to learn how plants respond in your conditions, because obviously when I first had a windowsill and I was treating them as if it was a nice sunny windowsill, I lost an awful lot of plants to rot at that stage. So yeah, get used to your conditions. Some plants are more forgiving than others. I've got some, like the aloe behind me, that I've had for 40 odd years. Others don't last a season. And you find certain types of plants will survive well in your conditions and some won't. I don't have much luck with adeniums, for instance, in the way I've grown them. Stapeliads are often a problem for me, but other things grow like weeds.
Really good. We're getting some questions coming through in the chat, which we'll come on to in a moment. But if anybody wants to ask a question in the chat, then please pop it in there. Equally, if you want to raise your hand digitally, you can use the reactions button at the bottom, and you can ask your question on camera if you wish. So we have got a couple of questions.
A couple of questions there about bubble wrap clips. You can get them from garden centres. Sometimes you'll find just this bit and this bit separately. The last time I got them off of Amazon. If you look in there, you can see which ones they are. You can see that they've got all the 3 bits that you need if you haven't got any. So you've got the base part. There's a sort of washer type ring that bubble wrap goes in there. That goes on top. And then there's this little clip bit that goes in there. Can be a bit annoying when you're putting them in. If you're twisting it, sometimes this one comes out of the little grooves in the greenhouse that it's supposed to sit in. The other one that I've seen and had that came with some bubble wrap I bought was these little black ones. I don't know if you can see them very clearly there. They are pretty rubbish. This end falls off fairly easily. This end does not stay in the groove at all. If it's not well held in the bubble wrap, it will just slide down and drag the whole thing down with it. So yeah, I don't use those anymore.
Do you use, I suppose the other question on that one is, do you use a particular type of bubble wrap? Is it some sort of horticultural grade?
Again, I used to get it from a farm supplier nearby, because the first few years I got it from them, it worked brilliantly. It was the right stuff. It's sort of like, there's almost like a sheet of plastic on both sides. Some of the bubble wrap just for wrapping things, posting and things like that, is just got a single sheet with the bubbles on top of it. That usually is rubbish. Fine if you've got a little gap where it's torn and you just want to patch it, but I wouldn't use that for the whole greenhouse. So again, I think the last lot I got was another Amazon visit. It's
certainly where I got mine.
Let me just have a look. Oh, I think I've missed a couple of questions there. Let me just oops, get my cursor in the right place and move that up a little bit. Oops. Make that a bit bigger. Right, so repotting, watering, bubble wrap clips. Temperature in the winter. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Up to this year, I have kept it sort of set at about 7 or 8 degrees, because with the thermostat it will go down a degree or 2 beneath that. So if it's set at 7, you've got a minimum of 5. And obviously it's only correct for where the thermostat is. So there might be another patch in the other side of the greenhouse where there's a little cool spell. So I tend to sort of err on the side of making sure the whole greenhouse will be up to 5 degrees minimum. But unfortunately, at the moment, the way my collection is organised, I've got winter growers and summer growers mixed in both greenhouses. Ideally, it would be better to have all the summer growers in one and all the winter growers in another. But unfortunately, when I got the second greenhouse, the intention was to move the big aloe down into that one. Wouldn't have had a problem getting out of this one because I've got double doors. Unfortunately, the other one only has single door and it wouldn't fit through. So that put pay to that plan, unfortunately. But yeah, about try for a minimum of 5. So I set it slightly above. Yeah.
You have a question. Do you have an opinion on grow lights?
Yes, I do use grow lights for seedlings. A couple of years ago, I grow quite a lot of mesem seeds, and a lot of those, being winter growers, plant sort of round about end of the year, beginning of the year. And we had a particularly grey, miserable January, February that year. And the seedlings all got stretched, grew very weak, and then all died. So I thought, well, what can I do about this? So I do now use a grow light, particularly in those sort of early months of the year, until things are ready to come up into the greenhouse. And it gets them nice and compact. That lot probably could do with repotting at some stage themselves, but yeah, I do use it 12 hours on, 12 hours off, usually on a timer.
That's useful to know. It's a new technology that's very helpful. We have a question from
There's
Philip.
A lot of different ones out there, though.
Yeah.
The one I had before this one worked for about 4 or 5 years, and then just didn't switch on when I came to start using it again. And I could hear something rattling inside. So obviously, a bit of the soldering somewhere had come out. Yeah. So, you just buy the bullet and get another one.
So a question there from Philip. Does the layer of air between the glass and the bubble wrap help prevent condensation at all?
I would guess in terms of it being separated from the plants a bit more, it probably would be quite useful. As I say, this greenhouse, although it's newer than the other one, does tend to leak a bit more than the other one. The window seals are not great, and there's little gaps. Obviously, come the winter, I do put a whole row of bubble wrap across the middle, because apart from the aloe, there's nothing up in that space that I want to heat. So it's pointless me trying to heat the whole greenhouse. So I try and sort of bring the roof area down as much as possible with bubble wrap as well. again, that's going to become more important as the years and the costs are increasing.
Certainly going to be a concern for us all. We have a question from Anne Martin. Anne, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Right, okay. Yes, it's about seed sowing. I've sown a lot of seeds this year and only the lithops have come up. How long do I have to wait for the others to come up?
When were they sown?
May time.
May time. For most, if you've got other mesems and things, most of those tend to come up sort of fairly quickly if it's good seed, sort of 10 days, 15 days, some even quicker. So for those sort of things, which is the type I grow most of, most of them, if they haven't come up within a sort of a month or so, probably aren't going to. There are, as ever in these things, exceptions. What I learned from the Mesem Study Group bulletin a few issues back was that some of them with a harder coating are quite useful if you grind them a little bit between a couple of bits of sandpaper before you put them. I'm guessing that's mimicking them being blown around in the sand and soil where they would naturally be growing, and sort of just breaking that coating a little bit so it's easier to germinate. So I tried that on a couple of them. For one of them, I did half that I used the sandpaper on, half that I didn't. I had full germination in the ones that I used the sandpaper on and only one on the other half. So there does seem to be some sort of use behind that. But again, it depends. I mean, I wouldn't do it to things like lithops or conophytum seed. It's too small in the first place. If you put it on the sandpaper, you probably never find it again. But some of the bigger, harder seeds,
most of them were quite small seeds. So I did have them in a propagator. To start off with, but I don't know, it just didn't seem to want to grow. I'm not very good with seeds generally.
Sometimes it's just trial and error. I usually start them off in bags. A lot of the succulents will be out within a couple of weeks when they're germinated, like the mesems. Some of the cacti will stay in there for a few months. I know some people leave theirs in there for a year or more, but I get too nosy to see what's going on in there. And then sort of try to acclimatise them. Most of the cacti would stay inside on the windowsill, so I could keep a better eye on them for about a year before they move to the greenhouse. Some like these mesems I was showing earlier, they were only planted earlier this year in March, so they're quite happy out here.
Any particular thoughts on what time you would sow?
Again, for cacti, I would tend to use early spring. If you've got grow lights, you can sort of make it a little bit earlier, maybe March time. Particularly if it's indoors and you can have heat and stuff. For some of them, they do need a bit of temperature contrast to germinate as well. So sometimes it can be quite good to put them on the windowsill. So they'll, particularly that time of year, they get their sunshine, warm up a bit during the day, and then cool down overnight. And that can sometimes encourage the germination rate a bit.
As with anything, it's a question of trial and error, I'm sure. And
I mean, I've killed many seedlings over the years, so you're not alone.
They're not safe in my hands, I have to say.
And sometimes it's the seed itself. You get seed that just is past its best, and there's not much you can do about that, really.
Right, thanks ever so much.
Okay.
That's great. No, it's been terrific. I think we had about up to around 180 watching. Of course, we've got more than one person on some of those feeds coming in. So you've had a lot of people in your greenhouse this evening, Dave.
Yes, it's felt very squashed in here actually.
Your neighbours are probably wondering what you're doing sitting out on your but you've got nearly 200 people with you, so it's been terrific. Thank you. But no, Dave, really great talk, and thank you very much for doing it. I think a lot of people will have found some hints and tips there. No matter how long we've been trying to grow our plants, I think there's some really good ideas there.